Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose. Affirmative.
Affirmative.
Okay, here we are again. Just another day in the New World Order paradise on this November. Boy, I'm trying to skip September and October and just get to November so we can survive. But it's September 20th, 2017. I'm Greg Anthony. This is the Investigative Journal. And you know, on my show, I like to talk a lot about the Jesuits, the guys pulling the holding the puppet strings, and talk about their history and talk about all of the deception throughout the centuries. But you know, they've thrown so much at us now that there isn't time. I mean, I have to talk about other things. And you know, by the way, if you haven't gotten it by now, it's too late. Just say your prayers and hope for the best, because things are really ramping up. Today, another 7.1 earthquake, about 125 miles southeast of Mexico City. It was felt all the way in Mexico City, felt very, very hard. And it came on the 19th anniversary, or it was in 1985, the big earthquake that killed many in Mexico City. Well, the death toll now in southeast Mexico is up to 40. This is the second big one in the last 3 weeks. The last was an 8.5. and in a nearby area. And so they're ramping it up. And, you know, on the weather front, I said yesterday, the best job in the world is a weatherman, and the best job in the military is a weather manipulator. The best New World Order tactic to destroy countries and cities and people is weather manipulation. Right now, we have Hurricane Mary, or Maria, the mother of Jesus, barreling with 160-mile-an-hour sustained Category 5 winds right into Puerto Rico. Head on. It's going to be a disaster there. An American interest, right? Then it's going over to the U.S. Virgin Islands. What do these things do? They got minds of their own. Mary's saying, hey, let's hit every American island there is, and then we'll head up to the East Coast. Barreling at a Category 5. Then it's going to veer up to the East Coast. Now, Jose is now dancing around the East Coast, and it's supposed to graze the East Coast and do a U-turn. And then as Maria comes up, they're supposed to dance around each other, meet and form a mega storm, a storm of biblical implications. And why not? They use Mary and Joseph and Mary. Behind that, we have Lee. And I don't know what he's going to do, but boy, they're ramping it up. And then, you know, yesterday I spent some time talking about weather manipulation and other things. Today I want to start out with the imminent World War III wars that are coming and a little analysis on that. But if you have heard Trump's speech at the UN today, you know there is going to be a huge conflict and a world war, and we'll explain what a world war really is, how many countries have to be involved, how many continents, etc., etc. And we're going to give you some interesting things to think about, because there's a lot going on all over the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that North Korea will be the only powder keg country. There's other things going on. So let's play. It's a 2-minute clip where Trump nails down North Korea. And listen what he says. And then you're going to realize where we're at right now, how close we are to a military. They're just waiting. I think it's going to happen this fall, because then the winter darkness. Can you imagine what will happen in America if there's a war going on in the winter and we don't have any lights? They do an EMP attack. They can do anything. Well, let's listen to Trump. Okay, this is just a 2-minute clip, and Trump is talking about North Korea at the UN. His first speech there.
Now North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life. It is an outrage that some nations would not only trade with such a regime, but would arm, supply, and financially support a country that imperils the world with nuclear conflict. No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do. It is time for North Korea to realize that the denuclearization is its only acceptable future. The United Nations Security Council recently held 2 unanimous 15-0 votes adopting hard-hitting resolutions against North Korea, and I want to thank China and Russia for joining the vote to impose sanctions along with all of the other members of the Security Council. Thank you to all involved, but we must do much more. It is time for all nations to work together to isolate the Kim regime until it ceases its hostile behavior.
Hey, NBC News viewers.
Okay, NBC News viewers. They cut out a couple, there's a couple of real interesting things that Trump said prior to that, highlighting some of the atrocities going on in North Korea. But, you know, these are the orchestrated leaders working together to orchestrate war. Now, when Trump says they don't want war, they're actually inciting war. They're going to have their war. And Trump is on the side of America and democracy. And then, of course, we have the Kim regime, who's also controlled by the Jesuits, playing the other side. And there's got to be a war all the time. And so now we stand, I believe, at the precipice of World War III. Now, I remember years ago I would talk about China and where the world wars could come from with a more humble approach, with an approach that stated, you know something, we can't predict these things, and it would be foolish to do that. But when it becomes imminent, when you've covered this story for years, and you look at all of the investments now that are going into the military, all of the money, all of the training sessions, all of the ramping up of the FEMA camps, all of Walmart's activities as far as processing centers, what they're doing with weather manipulation, destroying certain parts of our country. Right now, the people of Houston, Texas are being sprayed with antitoxins from military airplanes, and they're told to wear gas masks. That's just the tip of the iceberg of what's coming. And you know, that's why I'm not talking today about the Jesuits. There's no time, really. The time is up. And like I said, if you haven't understood it by now, it's too late. Just say your prayers and hope for the best, like I said at the beginning of the show. Let's do an analysis of where this war could come from, what actually is a world war. And, you know, why don't we just call it the planned setup? Because that's really what it is. And it's a setup, a plan, an outcome that all these countries work together. And the Jesuits pull the puppet strings. And it's undeniable. And I got this, there's a, where did I get a lot of information from? It's from I'll get the website before that, and I'll add my own comments as well, put it together, and I'll give them credit at the end here for some of their analysis. But, you know, this is a planned World War III. It's a play. It's an act. Remember I would talk about an act and a play and numerous acts? Yeah, it's been a play and numerous acts, a theater play, all these guys playing their roles. Some playing the bad guy, some playing the good guy, depending on what country you're in. The Hegelian dialectic. And this is their big finale, the finale before they bring in their new world order to protect and save everybody from all these evil people in the world that are winning wars when they're the ones instigating all of them. It's undeniable. The the sentence, a 3 World War, the Third World War scenario is right there. And this thing was developed a long time ago. If you go back to even what was said between Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini when he predicted all these wars, they've already achieved 2, not to mention every other war. Like, we're not even talking about the Korean War, the Vietnam War. And, we've only been a country for, since 1776. But since then, we've only been without being at war for 20 years. Because they make money off of it. And many of those wars, if not all, were orchestrated. Now, once America, we got to look at this differently than just North Korea. Because they've had our eye off the ball in the Middle East. But we're firmly entrenched in the Middle East. Would you deny that? We got first-line units there. Now, what about this? The Third World War, the final one, the final act, envisions maybe an attack on Iraq, Iran, and Syria as being the trigger to set the entire Middle East into a fiery conflagration. What about Israel and Palestine? Maybe one attacks the other. Israel attacks Palestine for terrorist acts. Anything can happen there. But once we're there, entrenched in the Middle East with all of our frontline units, North Korea could attack South Korea. Then we're forced to stretch well beyond our limits. Then what if China invades Taiwan? This will usher in the start of World War III. North and South Korea, China, Taiwan, you can't deny anything here. And what is the definition of a world war? How many countries need to be involved? And who decides at what point a number of regional skirmishes can be grouped together and called a world war? At the time, who called the official start of World War I or II? And have you noticed that although the term World War III is freely used in the alternative and the internet press, you don't hear the major networks calling World War III, do you? They don't use that phrase. But a world war is a military conflict spanning more than 2 continents, in which at least 20 major countries participate in an attack against a common enemy, and in which has the attention of the man in the street due to the significant loss of life. Yes, we can't argue that World War I and World War II fit that. And what about World War III? The only requirement left to fulfill the start of this war is that a military conflict spanning more than 2 continents. As soon as Israel attacks Palestine, or North Korea attacks South Korea, or the U.S., or China invades Taiwan, we will have the next world war well underway. And what's the timeline here? Now I'm going to call on, right now I'm going to call on this website who put together a nice little timeline for me. And thanks for somebody sending it to me. One of my listeners said, hey, you've been talking a lot about war. This is pretty good. So it's by James Joyner. He sent it, Gardner, Massachusetts. He put this together. The Middle East, Act 1. Widespread conflict to bring the entire region into flames of war, possibly triggered by Iran or militants in Pakistan using North Korean-supplied nuclear arms. The first scene in this act is the U.S. invasion of Iraq on March 20th, 2003. Act 2, Israel at war against her Arab neighbors, possibly Palestine. A Palestine state will be established so that Israel will be fully separated from the Palestinians. Listen out for the mention of a 7-year treaty to be confirmed by a world leader, probably Bush, only for Israel to viciously attack Palestine. Now we go Far East, hair-raising nuclear confrontations that threatens mankind's existence. Peter Lamessieur, author of the Armageddon script, page 223, written in 1981, includes China invading Taiwan and a nuclear eruption on the Korean Peninsula. Did he know something? Act 4. Erosion of confidence in the system so severe citizens will be panicked into giving up liberties and constitutional form of government. The plan calls for the dissolution of the United States Constitution triggered by a significant enough terrorist attack. The ultimate intent is to introduce a global government and a one-world religion. Yes, the collapse of the U.S. and the other Western economies and morals. All this is happening as we speak, folks. Act 6, significant population reduction, using natural and man-made disasters. Curtain call here. Who can tell how this war will end? Well, this James says, I will tell you. I have written about it in a manifesto to the world, but we will discuss it at your leisure. I tried to find the name of the author of the body of this work, but I could not find it. I recommend that you look at the various pages and levels of thought and input. It is an undeniable setup. This is the so-called play was written 30 years ago, and as you see is spot on. I found and posted it 7 years ago. Can't deny that it's going to come true. And you probably can find that at the average and average American Patriot.blogspot.com. So there's a little scenario of what, that was written 30 years ago, folks. Don't you think this whole thing was planned? And now we're in the position of the we're going to see the U.S. economy go. We're going to see the Constitution go. Now we're at that stage of all the weather manipulation and all the man-made disasters and the war. And then there'll be significant population reduction. And then they'll have their grand little New World Order, just like one of the old Rothschilds said the other day, that in reality we will have our New World Order by 2018. So that doesn't give us much time, does it? I always harp on we got to learn history. Yes, we do. But at this point, I think it's good to keep our eye on all the New World Order bombshells that are hitting all over the place. And I just was, I was driving, listening to the news. Hepatitis A outbreak. Terrible one in San Diego. 16 deaths so far, 400, 500, 600 cases. Now it's spread to L.A. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of certain things. I talked about Houston. Look what's happening in Florida. We haven't even, all these things are happening now. We're not even paying attention to the aftermath of these last two disasters. And the power's not even on in many for millions of customers, I hear. But there's so much going on. Another earthquake today in Mexico. And what tomorrow? We have to look for Mary and Joseph meeting up and dancing around New York and then knocking down the Statue of Liberty, right? As she already tore apart, going to tear apart Puerto Rico and then the Virgin Islands. So it's one thing after another. How can you lead a normal life? I mean, is it worth just shutting the TV, shutting the news off, turning your computer off, and just waiting for the bomb to hit? Or to be ushered off into a concentration camp? Is that where it all going to end? I mean, how is that? What is that? All right, so we got a few minutes here. Let's pick up a few little straggling stories that we never talk about, but I found this quite interesting. A story came out that Google is going to be hiring 1,000 journalists across the country and filling them into local newsrooms. Now, what's that all about? I'd like to see the qualifications to become a journalist for Google's, and then you get hired by the local newsroom. I guess Google's going to pay the bill because many local newsrooms have been cut to the bone so often that there's hardly any bone left. No reporters. But starting early next year, that's, of course, maybe that's when the New World Order will be there. That's all these reporters that have to get microchipped to be reporters, and they can only tell you the good side of the story. Some may get a chance to rebuild. On Monday, a new project was announced at the Google News Lab Summit that aims to place 1,000 journalists in local newsrooms in the next 5 years. Report for America takes ideas from several existing organizations, including the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Teach for America, and Public Media. It's all going to be government stuff, and if you got to be microchipped, etc., watch. It's crazy. What happened to independent journalism? It's not there. You think these 1,000? You think it's only be 1,000? They're going to put their men in to tell. It's going to be the mega controlled news organization they're going to have now. Wow. And so they're getting together with, who's RFA? I don't know, Google and RFA. I can't see it here, but they're going to pay the bill, with newsrooms only paying 25% and local donors paying 25%. The reporter will work in the newsroom for a year with the opportunity to renew. This is ridiculous. It's controlling, that's crazy, controlling the news now. And that'll be after the war, after there's a reduction in population, then they're only going to want certain things out. It's ridiculous, ridiculous. And you think these newspapers won't be strapped to some type of ideology that will be New World Order? Boy, that's a crazy story, isn't it? How much time we got left before we go into our first break? About 3 or 4 minutes. See, I want to say something here. I'm going to put this up on my website. I ran a pledge drive for a while. It didn't create that much money, and I'm just hanging on by a thread here. And, we got to keep going until they put the internet out. But I was thinking of doing this. There's a number of subscribers, and I'm going to send out a note to them. But also, if I could get at least 100 people to donate $15 to $25 and keep this thing going. And why don't we try for that? So if you got $15 to $25, send it in and go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com, and you'll see the donate button there, and I greatly appreciate it. I'll put a little story on my website and then send it out. So anyway, let's do that. Keep this going at least. I mean, if you listen, and there's a lot of people listen every day, lend a hand. Okay. In the second half hour, I want to talk about Soros. He's created this battleground for a second civil war in California. Some incredible things going on here that I didn't realize. And it has to do with China, Japan, the Japanese mob, and as well as intentions by China and the China Bank to somehow destabilize California and secede from the Union. I don't know how that's going to work, but it's an interesting story anyway, funded by Soros. And then I want to talk about children harvested for black market organ transplants. If it isn't, it goes from bad to worse when you start looking at what they're doing. And they're treating children worse than they treat animals terribly. You ever see the way they raise chickens now, and cows? Milk farms are ridiculous. Cows never see pasture anymore. That's no way to live. They take away all the mom and pop farms. Wouldn't it be great if it was just back the way it used to be? I would rather live in the 1800s and, not have outdoor plumbing or indoor plumbing and just enjoy the countryside and, ride your horse into town and, who knows, be able to carry a gun right on your holster, because, there's nothing wrong with that. It really deters violence. If you put a lot of good weapons in the hands of good people, the bad guys don't want to come up and rob you, I used to have a friend who owned a restaurant in South Dakota, and he used to carry a sidearm exposed all the time. And I asked him, and he says, yeah, I carry a lot of money, but nobody bothers me anymore. And he said Clinton came to his restaurant during one of his tours when he was running for president, and they were going to have lunch at his restaurant in Mitchell, South Dakota. And guess what? They told him, you got to take your gun off. He said, well, if I have to do that, you can go eat somewhere else. So they let him carry his gun. Good for him. And he said, I'll give you added protection. You're eating in my restaurant, I'll give you added protection. I don't take my gun off. And they agreed, and they had lunch there. And so the story goes. But anyway, I never understood why the gun people don't realize, the anti-gun people don't realize that. You're a lot safer if you can defend yourself than leaving yourself wide open for these criminal maniacs to just kill you. But anyway, back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, let's get a move on here. That was a short 3-minute break on First Amendment Radio. Now we're back on the Investigative Journal on this Wednesday. It is now, as we speak, September 20th, 2017. A major earthquake earlier today hit southeastern Mexico, about 125 miles southeast of Mexico City. Death toll now stands at 40, a 7.1 quake that comes on the heels of an 8.5 that recently hit in southern Mexico. So Mexico can't catch a break. They also, the Hurricane Lydia ripped through Los Cabos in Baja, southern Baja, and killed at least 4. And I outlined what was going on with Mary and Joseph, the 2 big hurricanes now threatening now Puerto Rico. Mary threatening Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and heading up into the East Coast. So we got to keep an eye on that. What else is next also? Keep an eye on Yellowstone. Keep an eye on earthquakes up and down Cascadia up in the Northwest. I don't think they're going to spare the West Coast. Not much has happened, has it? The West Coast is outside of the fires, burning California down. And much of the Northwest, fire after fire, they're kind of laying off the West Coast. But there's a lot going on in California that we don't really understand. And I want to just outline a little bit of what California is really like, because I've lived there. I've came to California on and off since '85. Lived in LA, got my law degree there, and then moved to San Diego. So I know the state quite well, and I particularly stay for the climate. Yes, plus I like the ocean and the mountains. And I enjoyed scuba diving, and I said, hey, you got to have some enjoyment in your life. And I got tired of shoveling snow in Colorado, although that's a beautiful state. Now, California, it's going through a lot of upheaval. There's competing forces are fighting to control we have the 8th largest economy in the world here. California's political interests are diverse, depends on where you live. Economically, California is home to, it's the greatest poverty country, and it's also got the greatest level of affluence. Its interests could not be more diverse in this state. Legislatures would make Hitler and Mussolini blush with envy at the extreme liberalism and lack of personal liberties. It's a state that's it's an unbelievable state. I should have known when I first got here. I got a jaywalking ticket on Wilshire Boulevard the first day I was here. And the cop was a motorcycle cop. I never paid the ticket. I ripped it up. I don't know whatever happened to it. It's not on my record. Maybe he ripped it up. However, some of the most ardent conservatives live in this state as well. Orange County, for example. And then there's 10 million Californians, and that's a low number, where English is not even the first language. Yeah, I mean, I lived in Chula Vista, and I live now in Mexico, and there's not much difference. Really. I go to the grocery store in Chula Vista, California, and everybody speaks Spanish. In the parks, they all speak Spanish. So, California is really an interesting state. Now, there's a lot going on here. And there's this movement now called CalExit. You've seen these in Texas. I've known Texas has been talking about this group there. It's been talking about leaving since the Alamo, I think. But Soros is supposedly involved here. Now, according to this guy, Paul Preston, I was sent this story. Reports are circulating, and I don't know if you can believe it or not, but let's, then again, I'm just reading it to get your mind off all the other stuff. Reports are circulating that numerous state legislatures from California, including California Senate Pro Tem Kevin De Leon, state reps from Florida, Texas, Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado, have been meeting with members of La Raza, the Mexican government consulate, Mexican mafia, California violent Mexican gangs, Notenos and Sorenos, Sur 13, La Familia, and, of course, religious leaders and Jesuits, to come up with a plan to hightail it out of the United States, as well as the above-mentioned states are thinking about going. Governor Brown, his aides apparently are working with the Bank of China. He went over there a while back, remember? Have been in attendance in several of these meetings designed to sever California from the U.S. Further, this independent guy, Paul Preston, journalist, learned that Soros is bankrolling some of the costs associated with this movement. In addition, Soros, the United Nations, and the Chinese government have had representatives at the CalExit meetings. Now, this is an interesting story. They say 2 Japanese generals recently had an all-day beheading contest. Now, I don't know if I believe this. The ringleader was Sasakawa. Most shockingly, members of the Sasakawa Japanese crime family are in cahoots with Governor Brown's efforts to become El Presidente of California. By the way, Sasakawa crime family is named after the one and only Sasakawa who engineered the brutal rape in Nanking after the war. Sasakawa was not executed because he had money and could use as an asset. The Sasakawa crime family came to run Mitsubishi. In addition, subsequent meetings revealed that the Bank of China is helping to bankroll this movement in conjunction with Soros. I want to emphasize that the Obama administration had representatives in the same room as these organized criminals. Well, they're all criminals. This is treason of the highest order. Well, does that matter? Today, former attorney Eric Holder is leading the movement. In addition, the criminal cabal elements already mentioned in the preceding paragraphs here that I've mentioned, MS-13 has entered into the equation. Based upon information received from the Border Patrol and DEA personnel obtained in the summer of 2014, Preston learned that MS-13 was being captured by the Border Patrol and then ordered released by DHS. This is significant because MS-13, as I reported 38 months ago, and that was Mr. Preston reporting, plays the role of political assassins for cartels in Mexico, in which they carry out hits on law enforcement, political leaders. That's been going on a lot, and even in Tijuana lately. Members of the media and respective family members. Their presence guarantees that same behaviors in California and perhaps beyond for any and all opposition to this unholy alliance. But it's interesting. On a related note, Congressman Paul Gosar on 9/17/17 said he expressed grave concern about the role of MS-13 is playing and will play in our country. Yeah, they allow this gang to grow. They work together, right? But you have to understand that. Let's look at this. I'm not even going to get into California seceding. I don't even think there's going to be like a... oh boy, where does this come from? Amazing. Just out of nowhere. I get this music that plays all the time. Are they listening? Or is it my computer? They're into my computer, into my head, with their voice-to-skull mechanisms. But anyway, let's get back to this. There's really no legal mechanism for a state to legally withdraw from the United States. It's a difficult process, and I don't know if that'll ever happen. But they can cause a lot of turmoil and strife and also chaos, and maybe that's really what they're after. Because they're going to unite this country into like different quadrants, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, I wanted to get on with the next story. Okay, now this is a really terrible story. It first hit the news. I remember back in 1998, 1999. And I wanted to go over it again because you imagine how much worse it's gotten now. But back then they were talking about over $32 billion in profits generated by the human trafficking industry every year. And it's an amazing story. And you know that all the governments and cartels, and whether you're a Western democracy leader or a dictator from the East, you're working together with the powers that be at the top. You know the Jesuits got their pedophile hands on this story as well. But even back in 98, in the Journal of Nursing Ethics, you can go to volume 5 and 6, they published a story, I remember it well, called Children Sold for Transplants, Medical and Legal Aspects. And it was co-authored by a number of different people: Ulla Fasting, Nurse Clinical Development Coordinator, Jan Christensen, Danish Working Group for Children, Amnesty International, Susan Glending, Save the Children. And when the story comes out like this, you know that there's something even more sinister going on. This is just the top layer of the story. It gets probably much worse because they usually put these out to get the idea that we're going to do something about it, but then it gets worse. And the real stuff never gets really covered. But 18 years, well, how many years after this? It was in 98. Over these decades, there has been a substantially higher percentage of these successful organ transplants on kids, but also a significant imbalance between the demand for the and the supply, creating the basis for it's a highly profitable black market trade in human organs and flesh. Sometimes there are reports that children have been kidnapped only to reappear later lacking one kidney, or that they simply disappear and are subsequently killed to have all their transplantable organs removed for profit. Oh, God. I mean, how can people live with themselves? I mean, this is complete. It's complete off the wall. I mean, I remember, I know people that when they're walking down the street, they won't step on a spider. And I really get to the point where I can't hurt a fly. Unless, of course, he's bugging the hell out of me. But you know what I'm getting at. Now, the European Union feels, oh boy, this is where I really, when I get stories like this, I start to throw up. The European Union feels that there's a need for action. You know, they're behind it all. But they got to throw some, they got to throw some people out there that act like they're really helping you. The legal production of children with regard to organ transplantation is not specifically mentioned in their existing conventions because this issue was not foreseen at the time of their right. They're involved in it. And you get a cut of it, so does the Vatican. However, the issue is covered in a broader sense by more general provisions. Okay. There are endless rumors surrounding this area. Members of various organizations who travel in suspected countries. Look, you try to get close to this story, you're going to end up losing your organs. That's how serious these people don't care. The traffic, they like children because they're new. The organs are young. Trafficking in children who are sold for, they don't want my organs, But I imagine they'd take them. Who are sold for transplantation. This is well known, but it's too difficult and dangerous to catch the people involved. That's how, they're right in that respect. So we had, there's got to be a conclusion that it's been impossible to prove or disprove these rumors. No, it's not. It's happening. And the problem is that the major players at the top of the crime organizations and at the top of the government organizations that control law enforcement, at the top of spiritual organizations, all are profiting from it. And every now and then they'll throw a low-level person to the wolves to act like we're cracking down on organ transplants. And you'll hear Trump say, we're going to crack down on child trafficking. It's never going to happen. Now, 1999, The Guardian had a report by Mona Eltahawy, Eltahawy, on homeless children in a shelter in Egypt who were killed for their organs in a lucrative organ transplant black market. That case was interesting because the Egypt's prosecutor general launched an investigation into claims that 25 children were killed at a shelter for the homeless over a 3-month period and their body parts sold to wealthy transplant patients in private hospitals. Maybe that's how they keep Henry Kissinger alive, or George W. Bush, or George H. Bush, and all these old Rothschilds, these old Knights, Knights of Malta guys. You ever see the Knights of Malta meeting, They're all over 90. Maybe that's what they do. They keep these guys going. Yeah, can you imagine if you're president of the United States? Hey, don't worry. With your health plan, goes along with it, we'll make sure that we can, you'll live a long life because if you start to lose your liver, we got a kid that we can kidnap and kill and you can get it. It's only going to cost you, Mr. President, maybe a few $100,000, which is nothing for them. But in a report, the MP suggests the organs were sold for between $9,000 and $330,000 each. Now, the officials in that town of the Nile Delta knew of the illicit trade. Many of them, the children were illegitimate, didn't have a family, and had been abandoned and left to fend for themselves on the streets. So there's no trail, right? No investigative trail. Egypt's Middle East News Agency said the Minister of Social Affairs told Parliament that a panel set up in June, that was way back when, to investigate the allegations, found evidence of financial and administrative irregularities, and that the children's death were the result of gross negligence by those who ran the shelter. So they covered it up, right? They covered it up in Egypt, they'll cover it up in America, they'll cover it up in Canada. You go, organ transplants from living donors must be authorized by medical syndicate, which usually only gives the go-ahead when the operation involves relatives. Okay? Good enough. That children's organs are illicitly harvested. Sold for transplant certainly adds credibility to the speculation that very wealthy global elites may also be using children for their blood, because young blood has been shown to have rejuvenating qualities. Up, you got to go to a story. Dutch banker Ronald Bernard blows the whistle on the world's satanic elite. Wow, I wonder what Mr. Bernard has to say. Yeah, I got a little bit here on Bernard, and he was a Dutch banker, and he was a whistleblower that talked about the elite blood sacrificing, and I don't know if he was killed or not. I think there was a story about that. I'll have to check that out. But I remember Bernard, he was involved in as a Dutch banker, and he was asked to participate, because he was a high-level guy, in a satanic blood sacrifice of children, and those who participated would be blackmailed by the satanic elite to do their bidding. Bernard began to refuse assignments. He wanted out but was trapped. He was physically tortured to prevent him from revealing names of companies, groups, and individuals. Eventually, he had a complete breakdown and ended up in intensive care, because he wanted to get this story out, how they kill children and they drink their blood, the whole works. When in IC, Bernard had a near-death experience in which he was outside of his body but saw the hospital staff working on his body. That convinced him that he is not just body but has a soul. It took a full year for his body to recover. And there's a great interview, I'll put that on my website, about this guy and how he talked about it, about what really goes on behind the scenes. And I want to see if this guy's still alive. I remember doing a story. I can't remember if he was killed. But wow. I mean, we know what goes on. And it's always, it always shocks me when you find a story like this, as if I don't know about it. But it always does shock me, because it's crazy. I don't know how these people really live with themselves. And their day will come. Their day has to come. If there is a God, if there is a creator, their day better come. But now everybody, he says this, everything you want to know about the world, you can know by the following money. That's the bottom line. Everyone can say blah, 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 but make sure you follow the money. Everybody thinks there are opposites, like good and bad guys in the world, but on the higher levels, it's just a game, and they're all working together, he says. Wow. Yeah, I'm going to get that interview and maybe we can go over it tomorrow, can't we? We only have about 4 minutes now. And he says, apart from the elite themselves, nobody in the lower ranks can find out what really happens. They suppress things on a need-to-know basis. He was asked if he were close to the top of the pyramid. And he says, well, we were communicating with them. He says this. He thinks there's about 8,000 to 8,500 people who run the entire world. I wouldn't doubt it. But anyway, what else did he say? He said he played at the highest levels for almost 5 years. And he said, I gave a small example of what was involved. Dollar to some deposit. Yeah, he's talking about reinvestments and money and all of the shenanigans that go on behind the scenes. And wow, just an incredible story. And he says this. He says, so the entire world, as we think we know it, is just an illusion we believe in, which is something you find out in this line of work. And where it all went wrong for me to put it in that way. In hindsight, yes, it was for the best, but my freezer started to malfunction. There were things happening. For example, I went to a different trade market, and all my colleagues there said, "Ronald, do you remember that case with the Italian lira?" I sometimes mention that during talks as well. Do you remember those deals? We did massive dumping of lira, which reduced the value of the currency, which caused a company in Italy to be hit in such a way that they went bankrupt. The owner committed suicide. Bernard said, yeah, back then we all laughed at it. Altogether, all of us, we looked down on people, mocked them. It was just a product, waste. Everything was waste, worthless trash, nature, the planet, everything. Just as long as our goals, as long as we were growing, all this horrible thing started to eat at me. And he gets into how he had his transformation and talks about how he was trained to be a psychopath. These people, most of them are all Luciferians. And you can say religion is a fairy tale. God doesn't exist. None of that is real. Well, for these people, it's the truth and reality. And they serve something immaterial, what they call Lucifer. And I was also in contact with these circles. Only I laughed at it because to me they were just clients. So I went to places called churches of Satan. Wow. I'll read a couple, just kind of get whet your interest. Maybe I'll go through this tomorrow. Yes, so I visited these churches just as a visitor dropped by, and they were doing their holy mass with a naked woman and liquor and stuff. And it just amused me. I didn't believe in any of this stuff and was far from convincing in that it was a real world. But he says this, yes, in my opinion, the darkness and evil, the darkness, where is this? Wait a second. Yes, in my opinion, the darkness and evil is within the people themselves. I didn't make the connection yet, so I was guest in these circles, and it amused me greatly to see all those naked women and other things. It was good life. It was a good life. But then at some point, which is why I'm telling you all this, I was invited to participate in sacrifices abroad. That was breaking point. Child sacrifices. And that was it. That's when I had to draw the line. The purpose of the whole thing was to eventually in the world is that they have everybody in their pocket. You need to be susceptible to blackmail. Hey, that's a Jesuit strategy, isn't it? Isn't that the exact Jesuit strategy? To get something on somebody, to blackmail them, get them involved in these child sacrifices, and then you got them. But I guess it was this guy's breaking point. And then he went out and started talking about it. And I'm going to find out if they did kill him, because I remember something about it, and I don't see it here. And we'll check on that, and I'll report on that tomorrow. So anyway, otherwise, I'll keep up. I'm going to go to my meteorologists tonight and keep an eye on Mary and Joseph, see where they're heading. And then we'll be back tomorrow again on our Thursday here on Investigative Journal. Have a good evening, and see you tomorrow. Good night. Thanks for stopping by.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.